Good evening, everyone. You're all very welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the Committee, and to my right, I'm joined by my fellow councillors, and it's going to be the five of us who will make the decision about the application in front of us this evening. To my left, I'm joined by senior officers, and they are going to present the case in front of us and also offer us advice throughout the evening. Okay? And they, this evening, are led by Amanda Reid, who is the Director of Planning and Place, lady sitting on my immediate left. So we can start. Can I ask Holly, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies for absence this evening.
Very good. Colleagues, are there any declarations of interest? No. Are there any other declarations that have to be made? No. Okay, there are none. Well, in that case, we can move directly to the main business in hand, which is the application in Notting Hill Gate, commonly always known as Newcomb House. And I think Cheryl Savarus, Cheryl, you're going to present the case to us. So please go ahead when you're ready.
That's right. Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, councillors, and good evening, everyone. We will get the presentation up on screen, and whilst we're doing that, I just want to start by drawing members' attention to this addendum report. It makes some corrections to the report. It updates conditions and adds 2 new conditions, and it updates the section 106 heads of terms regarding the public art contribution and the medical centre, and it also notes some further representations that have been received since the publication of the report. Okay. So the proposals before you this evening relate to an urban block and an urban space that dates from the late 1950s at the junction of Notting Hill Gate and Kensington Church Street. The site comprises Newcomb House Tower and the podium and the paved public realm in front of it. The site also includes low-rise buildings on Kensington Church Street, terminated by Royston Court, a surface car park, and accesses from Newcomb Street and Uxbridge Street. The listed roof of the Notting Hill Gate Underground Station is at the western boundary of the site, with residential occupiers in Jameson Street and beyond. The front of the site is marked by a 12-storey tower with a London plane tree at the corner of the junction. There is a bridge structure at 1st to 3rd floor levels of the tower, which connects to neighbouring David Game House, and it creates an undercroft at the eastern end of Uxbridge Street. The existing frontages that you see here of Notting Hill Gate and Kensington Church Street form part of the primary shopping frontage of the Notting Hill Gate District Shopping Centre. These images on screen show the existing paved area with street furniture and public art in front of the tower, with the steps that lead up to the podium, and then you can see the setback tower above. And in the bottom right-hand image, you can see the vacated office space within the tower. In the top images here, you will see the existing route along Uxbridge Street, which includes a ramped access leading to the undercroft, and it emerges by David Game House on Notting Hill Gate. And the bottom images show the view from the upper floors of the tower towards the car park and the access via Newcomb Street to Kensington Place. The image here shows the neighbouring building of 145 Kensington Church Street, which is separated by the application site by Kensington Place, with the 5-storey Royston Court forming the southern end of the urban block. The 1 to 2-storey linear block of shops and restaurants behind the row of street trees is just visible there, and furthest away you can see the rear of the tower. These images here show the front and rear of the existing premises on Kensington Church Street. And turning to Royston Court, this has vacant ground floor retail and 20 vacant self-contained social rent studios above it. And really, all these photographs serve to demonstrate that the existing buildings and their surrounds are not fit for purpose. They're of poor quality, tired fabric, and they are of little townscape merit. There is a significant opportunity here for enhancement. So the application before you this evening seeks planning permission to partially retain Newcomb House and to extend the building upwards, eastwards on Kensington Church Street and northwards on Notting Hill Gate, which would require the demolition of the existing podium and the bridge structure to Notting Hill Gate. The rest of the site would be demolished, and 2 new buildings with a double-storey basement would be constructed, and the proposals also include public realm works. This is a helpful diagram which shows the 3 buildings that are proposed and the public space in front of the tower, and the names of all these component parts which I will be referring to. Starting then with Newcomb House Tower, this would be a part 14 to 15 storey building containing mainly office floor space with some retail floor space. It would have a setback top floor for a roof terrace fronting Notting Hill Gate and balconies on its flank fronting Kensington Church Street. A new public Notting Hill Gate Square would be created in front of the extended tower, and the tower would feature a ground floor colonnade with a through route to Uxbridge Street. The Kensington Church Street block would be a new 6-storey building, plus basement and setback rooftop plant enclosures containing flexible retail space at ground floor and office floor space on its upper levels. There would be terraces at 5th floor fronting Kensington Church Street and step terraces at the rear from 3rd to the 5th floors. The last building then, the Medical Centre housing block, this would be a new 8-storey building plus basement and setback rooftop plant with medical floor space occupying the lowest levels and 8 social rent homes above. This drawing here overlays the existing building footprint of the site, which is shown in a purple dotted outline on top of the proposed footprint shown in black. On Kensington Church Street, Kensington Place and Newcomb Street, the proposed building footprint would largely match the existing, though the Kensington Church Street block would feature a ground floor colonnade that would widen the public realm. The current car park would be substantially filled with new built form, leaving a 20-metre separation distance to the rear garden boundary of Jameson Street. In this extract of that previous diagram, it focuses on the site layout of the Newcomb House Tower and Notting Hill Gate Square. The existing Newcomb House Tower would be largely retained, and the existing upper floors are shown in a pink dotted outline. And there would be an approximate 1.8 metre extension eastwards towards Kensington Church Street. The existing ground floor footprint, including the steps to the podium, is shown in a purple dotted outline, and the existing retail corner unit would be demolished to increase the public realm. You can see the existing podium area here in a purple hatched area, and the steps beyond would also be demolished to facilitate an 8-metre extension of the tower at its upper levels towards Notting Hill Gate. The ground floor would feature a double-height colonnade, which is identified in the diagram there, marking with the columns that come down to ground. And that would wrap along the building, along Notting Hill Gate, going round to Kensington Church Street. And this colonnade, fronting Notting Hill Gate, would line up with the route onto Uxbridge Street. So some of the key floor plans here. Proposed ground floor, it shows the office use that is proposed shaded in blue, with entrances from both Notting Hill Gate and Kensington Church Street. The flexible retail use is shaded in the pink colour. Newcomb House Tower and the Kensington Church Street block would be internally connected at ground floor and below only. The medical centre, which is shown in this turquoise colour, is a separate building and it has no internal connection to Kensington Church Street block next to it. The entrance is at the corner of Kensington Church Street and Kensington Place, and then the entrance to the housing above this building would be accessed from Newcombe Street to the rear. Also from Newcombe Street is the access to the servicing area at the rear. And again, the plan shows the colonnades that wrap around the building, and it also shows the publicly open spaces fronting onto Notting Hill Gate, Uxbridge Street and Newcombe Street. This slide shows a typical upper floor plan. This is the 4th floor. The housing, which is shaded in purple, starts from the 4th floor, and the office floor space in blue, you can see that on screen, would have access to outdoor amenity through the curved balconies to the tower, fronting onto Kensington Church Street, and also staggered rear terraces on the Kensington Church Street block, starting at 3rd floor to the rear and going up to the 5th floor. And there would also be terraces to the front at 5th floor level 2. On the roof plan, you can see plant enclosures located on all roofs, although on the Newcombe House Tower, that would be integrated into a plant room with a roof terrace beyond it, fronting Notting Hill Gate. The long section here through the site shows the arrangement of the proposed uses across the 3 buildings. Looking then at the appearance of these buildings, you can see the existing on the left, proposed on the right. The proposed tower would be expressed as 3 vertical segments terminating at different heights, which would articulate the roofline and present a more slender form in some views. The grounding of the tower would also, onto the street, would also help animate the street. Each of these 3 buildings have been designed with its own distinct character to respond to its immediate context. So in this instance, the tower takes reference from the family of 1950s buildings on Notting Hill Gate, such as the vertical grid and the solid vertical elements too. However, the elliptical forms to these window openings would be uncharacteristic to Notting Hill Gate, though it has been described in resident engagement as being more visually interesting than the rectilinear openings found on surrounding buildings. The extent of glazing and the projecting curved balconies would be contrary to the unadorned elevations of 1950s buildings on Notting Hill Gate and also the character of Kensington Church Street, but nevertheless, the overall design is considered acceptable. Notting Hill Gate Square has been designed to be used flexibly. It would contain some planting and seating that would not impede the pedestrian desire lines to the office entrance and the route towards Uxbridge Street, and the tree planting would help create a buffer to the busy road. On Uxbridge Street, the existing route would be enhanced through the double-height colonnade of the Newcombe House Tower, which would create a clear line of sight to Notting Hill Gate. The route along Uxbridge Street would include a widened ramp with a rail adjacent to the rear of David Game House. There would be steps adjacent to the ramp, which would help navigate the level differences from Notting Hill Gate Square to Uxbridge Street. Kensington Church Street block has got a staggered roofline, and the facade has been divided into bays, which does help break down its bulk, though the repetitive appearance over what is a long plot length would add to its perception of height. The central bay to the building to the front would have a slightly different design, which would successfully mark the building entrance. There is some taller glazing at the 4th and 5th floor levels of the front elevation, which would cause a slight sense of top heaviness to the building, and the roof plant would also diminish the quality of the roofscape, but overall in design terms, it is considered that this is an acceptable design. And here are a selection of images that show the office entrance and the experience of the colonnade, and also a slightly unusual gap between the Kensington Church Street block and the Newcombe House Tower. This view shows the view from Kensington Place down Newcombe Street, looking into the rear of the site, which provides the access to the housing, servicing yard and cycle parking. The height of the medical centre and housing block would bookend the urban block at its southern end. The proposed height at 8 stories would be higher than the varied range of 2 to 6 storey heights along the street, but nevertheless it would sit comfortably in both short range and long range views, and the corner chamfer to the building would help provide a transition between Kensington Church Street and Kensington Place. The rooftop plant, which you can just see glimpsed there in the image, it would diminish the design quality of the roofscape, but taking all design considerations into account, the overall design of this block is considered acceptable. During the course of the application, the building has been revised to include 2 stair cores in response to fire safety. The proposed design of the medical centre, which is on the left-hand side there, that has the support of the NHS, who is a potential occupier of the floor space. And then on the right, the proposed 8 homes would provide high-quality residential accommodation, with the lack of private external amenity being its only real shortcoming. Turning to heritage next, the site is not within a conservation area, nor does it contain any listed buildings, and for the most part, the proposals would not cause harm to the setting of heritage assets. And for this presentation, I've selected the views from the Townscape Heritage Visual Impact Assessment, where less than substantial harm has been identified, with that harm being either minor or very minor, so in other words, the very lower end of that spectrum, where it has been identified in the Ladbroke, Pembridge and Kensington conservation areas. And so in this next few series of slides, the views that you'll see on the left are as existing, and then on right, they are proposed. Starting with the Ladbroke Conservation Area, this view is looking south on Kensington Park Road, and the upper floors of the existing tower do project prominently above the buildings on Pembridge Road, and it forms a contrasting and a visually distracting element in terms of its height, bulk, massing and design. Looking at the proposed Newcomb House Tower, this would be a little more prominent and therefore present a little additional harm compared to existing. In this view, the proposed Kensington Church Street block would just be visible and obscure the legibility of the ridgeline of the Pembridge Road properties. In views looking east along Ladbroke Road by Kensington Temple, the proposed Newcomb House Tower would appear over the roofs of Pembridge Road, causing a little additional harm. Moving then to the Pembridge Conservation Area, there is a view through a Grade 2 listed archway to Linden Mews, where the existing tower can be seen. It's partially infilling the gap there between the 2 terraces, flanking the arch, and the sky around the tower allows the upper stories of the terraces to be unobstructed, and the existing tower reads as a backdrop building compared to the terraces. In the Pembridge Conservation Area appraisal, it identifies this view and gap as important, and the Linden Gardens buildings on either side are identified as positive contributors to the conservation area. On the right, you can see that the proposed tower would erode this gap. It forms a more visually intrusive element, but it still would remain as a backdrop building. There would be clear sky retained above and around it, therefore causing very minor additional harm. In this view, the proposed buildings would have greater height and massing than existing, but would not cause a significant effect on the Kensington Conservation Area. The appearance of the site would be a benefit in heritage terms, and it would provide a better townscape backdrop to the historic buildings, and also have a higher quality of architecture. But the proposed external curved balconies to the flank of the tower would be an alien feature here, and that would form a slight harmful visual distraction in those views. As existing, there is a great contrast between the existing modernist tall tower and then the modest and intimate scale of the properties in the Hillgate village area. And looking east along Uxbridge Street, the western flank of the existing tower does form a dominant and visually distracting backdrop to the historic streetscape, and that's not helped by the green safety netting that you see there. The bulk and height of the proposed tower would be greater, but the overall change in effect would be minor, mitigated by the improved design. Looking east along Kensington Place, you can see Royston Court and its core overrun is just visible at the end of the road. and it does read as a background building that makes a neutral contribution. The proposed medical centre and housing block would create a greater visual distraction there, though its height would be lower than some of the foreground buildings, and that would become less pronounced as you would move further east down the street, also mitigated by the improved design, so the effect there is largely neutral. The effects of the proposals would be most noticeable in Hillgate Place. At present, the tower is tower's visible in views looking east, and it causes a localised interruption to the skyline. The proposed tower would obscure a much greater area of the sky, and the Kensington Church Street block would form a new built backdrop. However, the effect on the skyline would change in views moving east, and care has been taken in the design of this building to avoid a monolithic appearance by breaking up the mass, softening it with landscaping, though the rooftop plant enclosures would be detracting features. Nevertheless, in considering those factors and the improved design overall, there would be some mitigation resulting in a slight harmful effect. In the officer's assessment, there are no heritage benefits that have been identified that would outweigh the minor and very minor, less than substantial harm to the setting of heritage assets. A reminder that any harm must be afforded considerable importance and weight and requires clear justification, and that less than substantial harm must be balanced against the public benefits of the proposals, which I will come to very soon. The impact of these proposals on all near neighbouring living conditions has been assessed. It's important to remember what the prevailing characteristics of this urban area are, and that there is existing low-scaled development on the application site, with the exception of that existing tower. What this means is that changes to neighbouring living conditions should be expected from any substantial redevelopment of the site. And compared to existing, the assessment finds that the proposals would impact neighbouring living conditions in terms of loss of daylight and sunlight, increased sense of enclosure, loss of privacy, and increased light spillage and noise. However, overall, those impacts are considered to be acceptable. Moving briefly on to transport, the proposals are considered to be acceptable in terms of its impact on the use and operation of the highway network. It promotes more sustainable transport than the car. The matter of step-free access to the Notting Hill Gate underground station has been explored, and it has been accepted that the retention of the tower and its foundations prevent that access from being formed. There would also be benefits to the streetscape and the pedestrian environment. The scheme performs well against environmental requirements. There's a slight shortfall in the urban greening factor score, but the proposals demonstrate that all greening opportunities have been taken on site, and the proposals do meet environmental standards in regard to this list of environmental topics. Coming then to the public benefits, the benefits that have been identified from these proposals are the enhanced and additional office floor space and enhanced retail floor space to the highly accessible Notting Hill Gate town centre, with the associated employment opportunities that brings, a new medical centre as a social and community use, 8 high-quality, affordable, social rent homes that meet identified needs in this borough, enhanced publicly accessible space, which is attractive, safe, inclusive and well connected on Newcombe Street, Kensington Church Street, Notting Hill Gate and Uxbridge Street, and enhanced connectivity from Notting Hill Gate to Uxbridge Street, and also the enhanced appearance of the site. These are all matters which are given substantial weight in the planning balance. The planning balance is very important. Here it is comparing the benefits of a proposed development with the harm that it may cause, and very rarely are developments entirely without harm or entirely without benefit. And the report demonstrates that all benefits and harms have been identified and weighed up to arrive at the recommendation. And the way to decide what impacts are more important than others is made very clear in planning legislation, that planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Conformity with the adopted development plan is given primary importance in planning because if an application accords with the plan, then it should be approved. However, we know that the development plan can't account for every conceivable situation, so in that case, material considerations become important. And it is possible for material considerations to be so important that they outweigh the development plan, but that is not the case in this instance. Also a reminder that not everything is a material consideration, and these factors should not be considered at all in reaching a decision. Just because something is desirable, it doesn't mean it's a material consideration. It must have a planning purpose. A reminder that the NPPF is a material consideration, but that does not displace the primacy of the development plan. And as I said earlier on, where a scheme causes less than substantial harm to a heritage asset, which in this case is minor and very minor, at the less than substantial harm, then that heritage harm, which has been afforded considerable importance and weight, must be weighed against the public benefits. And if the public benefits outweigh the harm, then a further balancing exercise is required, in which all harms are weighed against all benefits, and that has been done in this report, set out from section 6.489. So, finally, in summary, the benefits and harms of these proposals as a whole have been considered and balanced. The statutory duties regarding heritage have been adhered to, and national policies and guidance have been followed. All the identified harms do represent departures from aspects of certain policies of the development plan, but when that plan is viewed in the round and recognising that the policies may pull in different directions, the proposals comply with the development plan as a whole, and no material considerations have been found that would indicate a decision otherwise in accordance with the development plan. Overall, and subject to the recommended conditions and the completion of the Section 106 legal agreement, the proposals would comply with the relevant policies in the development plan and satisfy the statutory requirements regarding development in the setting of listed buildings. Therefore, the recommendation is to grant planning permission. Finally, even if the committee consider that the departures result in non-compliance with the development plan as a whole, then there are material considerations that outweigh that departure, in particular the significant public benefits and application of the tilted balance, meaning that planning permission should still be granted. And I will end my presentation there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we have speakers this evening, and I think objectors go first. I think Amanda Frame, I think you're with us, aren't you, Amanda? So
I'm here, yes, thank you.
Yes,
thank
I
you.
think you're going to lead off.
Yes, I am.
And then perhaps as we go through different people speaking, perhaps if everyone could introduce themselves just very briefly so we know who people are. But I think there are quite a few people registered. So Amanda, when you're ready, please start. And in total, everyone's got 10 minutes shared. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I do apologize. I'm going to have to leave as soon as I make this speech. I have another meeting. The Kensington Society is here to support the residents and our members. We have a long history with this site. It might be pertinent to remember the reason why this committee refused an application in 2017, which was subsequently approved by GLA and the Secretary of State. The reason you refused that application was the height and architectural quality of the tall building causing harm to the setting of the heritage aspects that would outweigh the public benefit. That was your reason. And by the way, that was a tall building and everything else was lower than this application, significantly. The existing Newcomb House is 47 meters tall. This proposal is 12 meters taller, so it's 94 meters. So the reason for your refusal before is actually a reason to refuse it again. This application has 23,104 square feet of offices. Newcomb House is existing, has 5,619. That is a 360% increase in office space. The consented scheme has major public realm improvements. It had a public park, gone. It had the underground station improvements, gone. It actually had a medical center, not a medical surgery, smaller now, gone. The Saturday Farmers Market, gone. All housing except for the units required to replace Ralton Court, which has just been described as high-quality housing. The retail unit space is reduced, and besides the massing increase of the offices, there is no affordable workspace. The report states that there could be as much as 590 additional workers coming via local transport. And this is without any improvements offered in this application to the station to improve the capacity. The officer's report says there's public realm benefits, but it's stretching it. Besides the reduction of the surgery, loss of the medical center and now a surgery, all the applicant is proposing is a useless empty space on the pavement at the corner of Church Street, one of the coldest and windiest places and now called Notting Hill Gate Square. The density is an issue in the new national planning policy framework. However, it pertains to housing. It does not pertain to offices. With offices already approved, the Pelham Street buildings, 2 of them, and the South Kensington Station, and the 2 opportunity areas in Kensal and Earl's Court, there is certainly questions as to why we need 316 additional increase in office spaces, and the loss of the houses from the consented scheme that could in any way be contemplated to be approved. Housing is a material consideration. The lack of public benefits is a consideration. The harm that's just been demonstrated by those views is a consideration. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Who would like to speak next? Please.
I'm Sophie Massey-Cook. I'm speaking on behalf of the Hillgate Village Residents Association. Residents remain deeply unhappy about the size and bulk of the development. The proposed office block physically does not fit in its context and will dominate the tiny houses of Hillgate Village, as well as views across the gate from other conservation areas. Repeatedly, the officers have just described it is overall an acceptable design, a slight harmful effect in some views. The architecture is mediocre at best, the tower bloated, and the rear end too high. The limited public benefits don't justify this monstrous intrusion on Notting Hill Gate, nor have the developers provided any viability assessments to justify the apparent greed of their demand. It is not only an unsatisfactory proposal, but a missed opportunity for a landmark building in this iconic location. At the consultations, we were told that the west side of the tower would be blank with no windows. The long west-facing window was only revealed in the depths of the application papers. Contrary to the officer's report, the window is not on the staircase, it is at the lift core. Presumably it is designed to provide a panoramic view of the West London for those arriving, and the opportunity to scrutinise the interiors of Jameson Street houses whilst waiting for the lift. This immense long window is antisocial, will cause light pollution, and represents a huge loss of privacy for the residents of Hillgate Village. Policy CL5 of the local plan requires reasonable visual privacy for occupants of existing properties, while 22.3.64 provides protection from light pollution harming the existing character of an area. New local plan policy G10 requires developments to be designed to minimise the impact of glare and light spill on local amenity, biodiversity and highway users. Enhanced connectivity between Notting Hill Gate and Hillgate Village is represented in the officer's report as represented as a positive, and the officer's report, residents do not agree that it is a benefit to flood residential Hillgate Village with extra footfall. The site has a history of antisocial behaviour and rough sleeping. The draft condition 28 on page 202 of the officer's report is simply wishy-washy. We understand that officers are recommending consent. Should the councillors agree, we request the following conditions to safeguard residents. 1, we strongly request a specific condition that Uxbridge Street must be gated at both ends during the hours of darkness. This accords with the Council's Designing Out Crime, SPD, referenced in section 5.8 of the officer's report. 2, use of the terraces on the east side of the rear building should be restricted to normal office hours, 6 p.m. 3, automatic blinds and interventions on the interior lighting plan to reduce light spillage. And 4, the glass of the west window on the tower to be obscured and non-reflective to ensure privacy for residents, privacy and reduce glare for residents of Hillgate Village. Thank you, Chairman, for giving us the opportunity to speak. I now hand over to Roberta to present her views.
Thank you very much. There are a few minutes left, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Roberta Spencer-Davison, and I am a long-time resident of this area. I've been living here since 1984. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish to speak about the effect that the proposed building will have on Kensington Church Street. At present, there are mostly low buildings, about 9 meters, on the block from Kensington Church Street to Kensington Place. The proposed development will significantly increase this. Apparently, it will be 28 meters, the whole block. Such a large building on such a narrow street raises concerns beyond the alteration of character. It threatens to cast shadows and diminish the natural light on Kensington Church Street. Also the arches, now that I look at them, I mean, I would not feel safe walking there at night. Anybody can jump out from hiding behind those pillars. The proposed development will affect the appearance of the street, changing its identity and turning into a bland, generic space that can be found in any city. Kensington Church Street and Notting Hill Gate are not just locations on the map. They're rich in history, character, and identity. They're not only places to live, but they attract visitors and tourists because of their identity. This development threatens to disrupt their balance and alter their very essence. It's not merely about adding another structure. It's about the potential loss of the distinct character that has defined this area for generations. We recognize the need for growth, but it must be in harmony with the existing landscape, respecting the architectural heritage and its cultural significance. Let's find alternatives that enhance rather than erode our area's identity. I really oppose this development, urging those responsible to reconsider their plans and work with the community to find solutions that respect the unique character of Kensington Church Street and Notting Hill Gate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, I think Mrs. Scott, are you there? Now, we're really out of time, but we've got enough time for, if you wanted to add a sentence or two to what's already been said, then please go ahead.
Veronica, I don't think Veronica Scott is here, Chair. She's not speaking.
Okay, well, she could help by asking answering questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for everyone.
I'm the next speaker.
Oh, well.
I'm the final speaker.
Oh, right. Well, I'm afraid we're almost out of time. So, but you've got. Please say you've got time for a sentence or two. So please go ahead.
I'm representing the Pembridge Association, and we also uphold the comments of our colleagues from the Kensington Society and Hillgate Village. Two important consequences of this are the impact of the developer's landscape and retail plans. No one would choose to create a public amenity space on the windiest north-facing stretch of Notting Hill Gate, hard against the junction of a major 6-lane road with poor air quality, overshadowed by an even larger tower. It's not a benefit. We would like to see substantial conditions applied to this application were it to be consented, including a full landscape proposal application to come back to this committee to cover the need for watering, maintenance, and particularly if the site changes hands, for the care and maintenance to be applied to the new owners and the new tenants.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure that I and my colleagues, I'm sure will actually pursue that when we have questions. So thank you very much indeed for that. So if we can now move to the applicant team, and I think we're going to start, I think Mr. Rowe, Duncan Rowe, are you going to speak first, and then Henry Squire, of the architects? Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
So please, when you're ready, you've got, well, slightly over 10 minutes, so please go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members. Thank you for your time today to allow me to address your committee. I will speak briefly before handing over to our architect, Henry Squire. We also have other members of our team present to answer any questions. My name is Duncan Rowe. I'm a founding partner of Beltane Asset Management. We are specialists in office-led development in London and have successfully delivered over 20 schemes during the last 15 years. Together with our funding partners, Angelo Gordon, we acquired Newcomb House in March 22 from its previous owners after they had decided that the residential-led proposal they had a planning approval for was not financially deliverable. We think Notting Hill Gate is a special place. It has amazing potential to create best-in-class office accommodation right in the heart of a vibrant and well-connected district centre. Our ambition is to further strengthen and enhance Notting Hill Gate with a new commercial hub which will bring a range of local economic and social benefits. As with all our projects, our first instinct was not to pursue the comprehensive demolition of all the buildings, and we asked our team to assess the potential for reusing a significant amount of the existing structure on site. In these challenging times of the climate emergency, we very much wanted to achieve a substantially reduced carbon footprint. This not only supports the circular economy, but will minimise the development programme and short-term impacts on the locality. Through extensive and continuous dialogue with the local community, we have always been honest about the commercial reality of what is necessary to ensure the scheme is deliverable. We've had to be mindful of arriving at a scheme we can build and then the long sterilisation of this prominent site. But we have done our very best to be responsive to the wide-ranging feedback we have received. There have been real and significant changes, which Henry will cover shortly. The site has degraded further and has been a missed regeneration opportunity for far too long. We're aware of how keen the community is for it to be redeveloped. We very much want to continue a partnership with the council, local residents and the local business community to make Notting Hill Gate an even better place. The development funding environment is not the easiest in the current economic climate, but I can confirm that the project is fully funded and your support this evening will allow us to deliver on these exciting proposals without further delay. Thank you for listening, and I'll hand over to Henry.
Thank you very much. We've been working on projects in Notting Hill Gate for the past 10 years, and I'd like to say that this project has had a very collaborative and respectful engagement process. I'd like to thank the council, local people and civic groups for their valuable input. Everyone wants something to happen on this site. It is vacant, falling into a serious state of disrepair, and has been in the planning system for over 10 years. Over the past 18 months, we have had 10 pre-application meetings, 2 development forums, 3 QRPs, and many meetings with local people and stakeholders. As a result, we have a scheme that is a significant improvement on where we started. We began with a radically different approach from previous proposals with a brief for offices. In response to the climate crisis, we are proud that we have been able to keep the existing tower structure and reduce the amount of basement dig compared to previous applications. This minimises carbon-intensive processes and encapsulates embodied carbon in the existing structure. The retention of the tower structure meant that the step-free access to the single platform of the district line provided in the previous application has been physically impossible to achieve. The only route through to the platform is through the existing tower substructure, and despite looking at these with engineering experts, we couldn't make it work. In terms of public realm and in response to local feedback, we have created a new, beautifully landscaped public square on the corner of Notting Hill Gate and Kensington Church Street. We've carefully designed that square to mitigate impact from traffic and wind and to be flexible throughout the year to ensure it is well used and appreciated. We've improved the connection from Hillgate Village at the eastern end of Uxbridge Street by removing a dark and unwelcoming passage in favour of clear lines of sight, improved lighting and landscape. This reduces the opportunity for antisocial behaviour, rough sleeping and crime. We've introduced a colonnade along Kensington Church Street, widening the pavement. We've improved the visual amenity at the rear from Kensington Place into Newcombe Street, and we've provided active frontages on the two principal ground floor elevations. These measures will greatly improve the public realm and be a huge benefit to Notting Hill Gate. The massing and design of the proposed scheme underwent significant debate and design in evolution. There are three elements to the proposal. Firstly, the tower. By only adding 2 stories plus a plant level, the overall height in comparison to the previously consented scheme is significantly lower. The widening of the tower by 1 bay in the direction of Notting Hill Gate allowed us to create the generous public space in front. Both of these have minor or very minor impact on surrounding views and conservation areas, confirmed by officers and Historic England. The design of the tower has been the subject of most debate. On the one hand, there was the desire from officers for us to respond to the 1950s architecture of Notting Hill Gate, and on the other hand, local people and ward councillors wanted something new, modern and exciting. We believe we have achieved both. Like it or loathe it, Notting Hill Gate is characterised by 1950s modernist architecture. The proposal's facade composition, combining a solid element to the western end, strong vertical emphasis, white GRC materiality and geometric shapes all respond to that character. The elliptical geometric shapes also respond to the more artistic and bohemian nature of Notting Hill. We note that design officers favoured a more rectangular treatment of the facade, but the elliptical design achieved significant local support in meetings when compared with rectangular options. We have not slavishly mimicked 1950s architecture, but captured its character and involved it in a new, exciting and contemporary way. The second building on Kensington Church Street is 6 stories and sculpted to the rear to minimise its impact to Hillgate Village in terms of sunlight and daylight, overlooking and distant views. The building is set back from the western boundary to create a minimum distance of 20 metres from the Jameson Street properties. As the building rises, it's set back, and the terraces reduce the impact of massing when seen from Hillgate Village and provide a broken and fractured backdrop, provide amenity to the office space, a minimum tenement requirement in a post-pandemic world, increase the site's biodiversity with linear planters along terrace edges, act as visual and light barriers to and from Jameson Street buildings, ensure we minimise sunlight and daylight impact to surrounding properties. We've worked hard at this and are pleased that officers have concluded the proposals would not result in material harm to neighbouring living conditions. The terraces will not be allowed to be used between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. to minimise disturbance. These are not event spaces. They are there to allow access to fresh air and relaxation for health and well-being. And it is worth pointing out that the tube station is between the Jameson Street buildings and this proposal. The building's material is brick in colour to complement the nearby brick buildings along Notting Hill Gate and in Hillgate Village. We've been acutely aware of the need to minimise visual impact to Hillgate Village and preserve its attractive character. Whilst the proposal will undoubtedly be seen, it will provide a complementary and sensitive backdrop. It is characteristic of the local area to have 6-storey buildings on main roads with smaller buildings behind. We are aware of the concerns regarding light spillage from office windows. Reducing energy consumption in office buildings is a top priority. Lights will turn off automatically when the offices are unoccupied, and the lighting intensity will be directed away from the perimeter. In tandem with the external landscaping, these measures will ensure light spillage is not an issue. Concern has been raised regarding 3 vertical windows in the western end of the tower. These are to the lift lobby and will be subject to the same lighting controls as above. There are already 3 admittedly smaller but uncontrolled windows in the same location on the existing building. The third building is comprised entirely of public benefit community uses. A new high-quality 8,000-foot medical centre has been developed in partnership with the NHS. 8 new affordable units are proposed above. While this is less units than the existing 20-bed sits, it is an uplift of approximately 400 square metres of residential floor space. The units are bigger, in line with the council's required mix, and meet modern housing standards, unlike the existing units. In summary, this proposal draws to an end, hopefully, of more than a decade of planning with a high-quality proposal. It retains as much of the existing structure as possible and will be an exemplar building in terms of sustainability and carbon emissions. It delivers high-quality office space and jobs to Notting Hill Gate, strengthening the High Street. It creates significant new public realm and active frontages, transforming the streetscape. It provides a modern medical centre. It provides high-quality affordable housing. It improves safety and connectivity to the wider area. It creates a new, extremely high-quality, distinctive campus of buildings that will complete the regeneration of Notting Hill Gate and be a positive addition for years to come. However well we strive to please everyone, we accept we will struggle to achieve that, but we have listened and we have done our very best to respond to key items of feedback throughout the process. We have also heard from many people who are supportive of the proposals and excited to see a better and more vibrant Notting Hill Gate underpinned by a thriving commercial hub. I hope that with your support tonight, we can finally bring about that vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Colleagues, our opportunity to ask questions. So who'd like to go first? Tom, Councillor Bennett. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question is regarding the medical centre to the applicants, and particularly from rear views. So the other building on Kensington Church Street, sitting to the north of the medical centre building, from the rear, the design, while not identical, looks really quite similar to the front, and I would say is sort of equally as handsome. The rear of the medical centre looks, to my mind, significantly less handsome, and particularly both the main sort of facade of the rear, and although it is the rear of a building, it has significant views from across Hillgate Village. And then on top of it is some plant, which seems there's been very little attempt to hide it or make it fit in with the building. So could you talk me through the design of the rear, including the plant, and what sort of work went on to try and make that as attractive as possible, given that it does have significant views? Thank you.
I think the first thing to say about the building is it's extremely tight building, and over the process of the development of it, with the mixed use between the residential and the medical use, the core to the building had to increase somewhat significantly, and the core of the building is situated to the rear of that building. That's the only place we could put it. So we have made all attempts to bring life and character to that facade, but it is essentially, it isn't punctuated by as many windows or the opportunity for windows as the front elevation, because that is where the core is located. We made all attempts to recess the plant screens on the top floor, and have mitigated, put as much plant into the basement as we can. Obviously, with the nature of that building and the uses in there, we are trying to minimise the overall construction costs of that building, and so we've had to put as much plant in the basement as we could, and the rest had to go onto the roof. But we made all attempts to recess that plant as much as possible, and we do believe that the rear of that building, as it turns the corner at least, has the same punctuation and facade as the front of the building. But then, obviously, we have to deal with the core.
Yeah,
Sorry, can I add one more thing to that?
Please do.
We had to increase the size of the core due to the new building regulations as well.
Thank you. I take your point on the limitations that the location of the core puts on the building. But in terms of the plant work on the top, did you not consider either a slight parapet which would hide it, different materials covering it? It just really does sort of stick out like a sore thumb in a number of the views, particularly from Hillgate Village.
We did consider heightening the parapet. I think there was a desire not to have any additional overall height to the main body of the building, and when balanced up between the distance views are static, and there is because you can see that building from quite a distance, it's almost impossible to hide it completely. So it was felt that the not raising the parapet too high to effectively bring another story or half story or whatever perceptive to the overall height of the main building was better when weighed up in balance to seeing what will be a recessed and light-coloured plant enclosure from distance.
Who'd like to go next? Sonia. Yeah.
Microphones. There we go. Question for the applicants. Are you able to explain a little bit how you justify the net loss of homes with this application? So obviously we'd be replacing 20 studio homes with 8 affordable homes. It's notable to me, it seems, that this significantly increases the mass and the height while decreasing the housing. Is there lots of demand for office space on the corner? Are you able to explain a little bit more about how you're meeting demand both for housing and what residents want?
If I could start with the on the office side of things, there absolutely is demand for best-in-class offices in central London. We're seeing that. There's plenty of examples of that. We're building various buildings in London at the moment, and particularly in the borough as well. We're seeing good examples of when best-in-class office space is built, there is strong demand. There is post-COVID. There's absolutely particularly best-in-class tenants are back in the office. We are seeing that. There's a trend, and there's some very strong demand for best-in-class offices in London, and an absolute lack of supply.
And sorry, I'll deal with the affordable housing question. So the scheme had to have a certain amount of commercial floor space to be viable, but to be deliverable. But as part of the scheme, the existing affordable housing is there. It's not habitable at the moment. In fact, it doesn't meet any modern standards at all. All the units fall below all habitable standards, modern standards, and energy standards. When we looked to bring forward a scheme, we were very flexible with the council and the officers in terms of what those community benefits would be. The medical floor space was seen as a key requirement, and we brought that forward, and there was a certain amount of floor space that needed to be brought forward to achieve something that was workable. And with the remaining space, we worked with the council to make sure that the units that came forward were absolutely the mix of units that the council was seeking, and also the correct size and quality, all of which were dual aspect. So they are very high quality affordable housing units, and all of which are will be for social rented accommodation.
I think it's also worth saying that it's an uplift in area, even though it's a reduction in units, because the units existing are so small and the new ones are much bigger and meet housing standards in the right mix. So even though it's a reduction in units, it's actually an increase in residential floor space area.
Toby.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what my colleague was just asking about. I mean, it might be it might be an overall increase in space, but I mean, it's a much smaller percentage of the development. I mean, you've got over 300%, I think, increase in the actual floor space being taken up. I suppose as I understand it, if I understand it correctly, the previous approval of the prior application, it involved a taller building, but the approval was contingent on offering a certain amount of public amenities. Now, as far as I understand it, there's actually, certainly in terms of like the overall, what you overall being proposed, there's actually a reduction. There was going to be an internal plaza of some kind, and proportionately speaking, more social homes offered. My question is how does that follow? I mean, just before I finish it, I am just minded that this is you are developers of office space, and I do feel that sometimes when what you are is a hammer, you just see nails. So if you see a space, you're going to privilege. And of course that's not our focus here on this side. So I was wondering if you could give me any more sort of rationalization for that. Thank you.
Yes, I can answer that. You're absolutely right. The scheme that was previously permitted, but has now expired, of course, was a residential-led scheme. It was a very different scheme. So as part of the policy requirements for that scheme, because there was a proportion of private residential development coming forward, as well as the replacement of the existing affordable housing on site, there was a necessity to provide a certain proportion of additionality on the affordable housing as well, as a requirement of the private dwellings that were coming forward in that scheme. The material change that has since occurred is the emerging planning policy now provides for either a residential or a commercial-led scheme. In this particular instance, we have an applicant who is willing to invest in a very tough economic market where certainly residential is not, is often unviable, but the applicant has experience of significant experience of commercial-led development. That is their business. That is the primary delivery purpose of the scheme. But at the same time, the replacement of affordable housing floor space and an uplift in floor space is clearly a planning benefit, and we were very keen to make sure that the quality of the floor space and the makeup of the floor space that came forward as part of the scheme for affordable housing met the council's requirements, which we believe it does.
Thank you, everybody. Just to listening to what the objectors were saying about a couple of aspects, I just wanted to see if I could get the objectors just to help me understand it. First of all, on path safety, and maybe the applicant might have something to say as well about what's being proposed in terms of security around there. So we'll see if applicants might answer this as well. But is this something that a condition or particular attention by officers and by the applicant could help you with? I see some nodding going on, so it might not need to be a long answer on that. The second question I had was about how visible are properties from the lift shaft glazed area? Because my only experience of offices, which is working in them for 30 years, is that when you're arriving, you want to get to your office, and when you're leaving, you want to go home, and you don't spend a long time staring out of windows at things. So I was just trying to look at distances, and are there people who are very, very close from those glazed areas, because on the plans it looks like most of the area is quite a distance, both vertically and horizontally. So yeah, those are the two parts. Maybe you just want to say on safety first. I would think you were nodding to say that something we might hear from the applicants is should be sorted out with good supervision. But maybe just on the sort of the lighting in the windows, how close are people to it?
Can you hear me? Yes. The window dimension, I don't think is a question of how close. I mean, it's a big building overlooking a very small small houses environment. A big window shaft, which wasn't in the original plans, will overlook, and as many of my fellow residents are worried, not only it's overlooking, but it's light pollution and glare, because the setting sun really hits, and so a big window will really create a big glare. It will be a huge problem. And frankly, if it's not needed, I don't know why they want a window there. There isn't a window there. At the moment, there wasn't one in the original plan. Suddenly it appeared, so a lot of people are against it. The security dimension is also a little bit of a sideline. The problem with this little alleyway is that, yes, it's not very attractive. It has attracted some rough sleeping and noises and whatever, and it is dark. The big issue is that it's a little, Hillgate Village is a small little quaint, secluded, tucked away, if you like, area, and by creating this how do they call it? I can't remember now the name. Banister? No, colonnade.
Sorry, but yeah. So, but the point, we know the area well. But
yes,
so the point is
but
that I think I'm interested in the applicant that there is obviously a current concern on you said badly lit and a smaller alley. And
yes.
I just want to hear from the applicants if I can. Whether do they have a proposal to address this?
The big issue is that beautification and increased footfall is not going to necessarily improve social behavior, security, calm, and so that's partly why Sophie suggested gates.
We understand the point. I think Councillor Mackover. And I think we'd like to hear what the applicants have to say in response to your concern.
Do you want to say something, Sophie?
Yes. What we think would be a great help in the situation is gating of Uxbridge Street, and also obscured glass in that large west face window. I think that's what you were looking for.
Okay. Well, I think Sam. I think we've heard those points. Why don't we ask the applicants, what's your response to these points that have been made?
The windows are a long way away. It's over 40 metres, because actually directly where those windows are, you've got Uxbridge Street, so there's no, they sit actually on that axis there, and you've got the substation that's directly adjoining the building, and the David Game office building that's also there. So the first residential building that those windows look onto is a significant distance away, much further than the Jameson Street buildings. There are windows there in that elevation at the moment. Obviously they've been covered up by the green netting, but they are in that elevation, albeit I do appreciate they are smaller and not controlled. On the gating, personally, I mean, I don't think that Hillgate Village wants to be thought of as a gated community. I also think that a gate that would have to sit at the top of the stairs would have to be double height, go all the way up to the underside of the second floor slab. And how do you open it? It would look like a fortress, and we can't really imagine how you would gate off the whole of that bit that enters into Uxbridge Street, and at the other end it would again have to be so high in order to stop people climbing over it and things like that, that I think it would, personally, whilst I understand the sentiments, I think it would actually make it look a lot worse. I think we have gone to great lengths and talked a lot with local people about that particular corner, and it's very sort of uninviting, and particularly at night quite intimidating to walk down there. But this connection, I don't think it's going to suddenly mean that floods of people are going to come into Hillgate Village. I don't believe that. But it is certainly going to reduce the opportunity for people to hide in the corners and in the shadows, and it's going to create a good line of sight with good landscaping and improved lighting. So we genuinely believe that we've made the really best effort to try and mitigate that without having to introduce what would be very significant, difficult to manage, and in my opinion, both open and closed, really unattractive gates if we had to gate it at either end and make those gates high enough to work.
I've just got a couple of questions myself. They're really to the applicants, if I may. My first point is that I think it's 2 points really. The first is in our pack, somebody has been really rather rude about the proposed Notting Hill Square, and I think they've suggested that it sort of be rather a small windswept kind of place where, I mean, in my experience, I've never seen a CGI image which showed something that looked scruffy and ugly. You know, in reality, unfortunately, sometimes public realm spaces are something a bit different. First question is, what are the plans, and also, is there money, service charge money behind it to make sure that this space is actually kept properly? Perhaps you can ask that question, answer that first, and then I've got another, just couple of questions.
We'll be maintaining that area, absolutely, as part of the management of that space. So we have no doubt that it'll be a very attractive space. We've got Andy Sturgeon as our landscape designer, who's been involved, so control and management will be down to us. If I could just go back on, and this is a management point as well, but I think it's important with regards to the security. There has been a rough sleeping problem down there currently. It's really important. The building will be manned 24/7. So I think the most important thing is to sort of stop it before it starts. We've been in contact with, we've got experience of this, and our managing agents have experience of this. We've been in contact with local charities to understand exactly the process. So it's really getting there before it starts in a humane and proper way, and dealing with the rough sleeping.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The second point I wanted to ask about was the Church Street building at the rear. Now, I agree that the separation from the rear, particularly as it's obviously step back as you go up, is actually, in an urban context, would have to be viewed as quite considerable from the rear of Jameson Street properties. However, there is a comment which has been made somewhere that having it's proposed it's a sort of red brick building, and I do think that the idea that if it was a slightly, and this would be part of the condition about materials as were we to prove this and it progressed, but the idea of having slightly lighter brick, because I think, you know, that rear facade it is mainly west facing, and I think that the setting sun potentially would shine onto it, and I think for people living in Jameson Street, if it was slightly lighter coloured, I think that would actually, that would be quite positive. I would have thought at potentially negligible cost implication. Is that something that you'd be happy to consider?
I just wanted to maybe just clarify that the bigger building is the light colour London stock biscuit coloured brick. That is what that one is, and that indeed complements the colours of the brick in the unpainted buildings in Jameson Street. There's been lots of discussions about brick colour, as you can imagine, and I think the corner building, if that's the building you're referring to, that is shown as red brick, that was purposefully drawn to be a different colour to break down the long elevation on Kensington Church Street. It was all the same colour brick.
Actually, Mr. Squire, in fact, it was the Church Street building I was thinking of.
That is a lighter colour brick. That is proposed as a lighter colour brick. Right. It's not red brick. That must be a misunderstanding there, for sure.
Colleagues, I can assure you, I do not wish to get into a discussion about the colour of bricks.
But we'll definitely look at it.
But I think, but I take the point, it's a serious point that was made by residents, that the Church Street, which obviously it's a substantial building, it seems more substantial because the building that is there at the moment is so low rise in the context of that part of Kensington and Chelsea. But I think a paler colour,
sure.
I think would have an advantage if you understand. I understand your point about I think it's the medical housing block, that has, it's a kind of richer red. I thought it's reminiscent of kind of formation in parts of Hans Town, where there's it's quite a strong red brick, isn't it? It's extremely common. No, I take your point about the corner building, but I'm really thinking of the Church Street building rear, which is the thing which the building that a large number of people living on that side of Jameson Street would see. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and we would of course be very happy to work with local people and officers to achieve a brick colour that, I'm sure it will be conditioned anyway, the brick materiality. So yes, we would definitely look at that.
Okay, and I think my just last quick point was just to come back to the point raised about some kind of gate between at the front between Notting Hill Gate Square and then going through to Uxbridge Street. I absolutely agree with your earlier comment that a sort of a full height gate would seem quite oppressive. That would look like some kind of particularly undesirable institutional building. But something that would nevertheless sort of mark the end of Notting Hill Gate Square when it was dark. Is that something that's not possible? Irrespective, I add, irrespective of what planners might tell you, is it something that, is there some technical reason why that doesn't really work?
I wouldn't say there's a technical reason, but so I'm sure that were there to be that an area that we could look at to see how we might improve concerns, but we genuinely do believe that actually improved lines of sight, it's just now a street, it's not a dark corner. The problem at the moment is it's a little undercroft, you have to turn at 90 degrees, there's very poor lighting, and it's where you can hang out. Once you can see all the way through to the square, and the office entrance is right there, and it's lit well and it's landscaped well, we really believe that we genuinely believe that those problems will go away to somewhere else, I'm sure, but not there. We would just come back and say that we've obviously discussed this at length with lots of people, and we think we've got a solution that genuinely will be a good one. but we could obviously look at it further and would do.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, Tom and then Toby. Yeah.
Just a couple of quick questions, Chair. The first one, I just wanted to go back to residents and perhaps Ms. Massey Cook, because it affects Hillgate Village the most, on both the medical centre, which I raised earlier, and the Kensington Church Street building that you just raised. Just to get your thoughts on the things we've talked about, and are there particular improvements or conditions we could put on that would improve the view of those two buildings from Hillgate Village? So that could be, we can't completely redesign it, but it could be stuff we talked about regarding colour of the brick, potential design of the windows, and the plant on top of the roof as well.
Sure, I'm Sandrine Westcott, one of the Hillgate Village resident committees, part of the committee. I also live in Kensington Place, so would be affected by that Kensington Church Street building. It's certainly true that changing the brick colour, I think, would be helpful. Ultimately, obviously, the massing is going to be an issue looking down Kensington Place, as the middle building is when you look down through Hillgate Street. They are much larger buildings than exist currently. To try and mitigate it, it's true the developers have tried to step back, put terraces and things like that. There remain valid concerns about overlooking and privacy. To try and mitigate this, yes, brick colour would help. Trying to recess plant and other obvious, extremely ugly things would help. It's hard to see, short of taking down a couple of stories, how the material impact on some of the views from Hillgate Village could be mitigated.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And then one more question, well, if I may, Chair, two questions for the applicant. So the first is on the public square, and there's been some discussion around the location of the square and the wind and traffic, and I think you said that the impact from the wind and traffic has been mitigated in the public square. Could you tell us how it's been mitigated?
Yeah, we've removed we sort of looked at the whole thing in the round again, and currently you've got those kind of slightly unsatisfactory planters on the kind of pavement edge that try to mitigate, you know, in the current square that impact, but it doesn't work terribly well. We've moved those inboards and created significant areas of raised planting and landscaping and trees, all of which help to mitigate wind because the trees break up the wind. You've got the very big London plane tree there already, which we are in these proposals maintain, but also additional trees and additional low-level planting help to screen the wind, and we've done studies on that, and indeed we believe that these raised planters with the landscaping will also, look, I'm not going to pretend that you're suddenly going to feel you're in a village square, but it will diminish.
Just to pause you 1 second, I wonder if we could have a picture up on the screen of the public square, just because it will make it easier to discuss.
Yes, I mean, so you can see in both of the top right and the bottom left picture these significant areas of raised planters and landscaping and additional trees all the way down there, which help to mitigate the wind effects and will provide a kind of more substantial barrier to the traffic than currently, whilst also allowing people who just want to walk down Notting Hill Gate to do that. So we've moved all that stuff right off the edge of the pavement, where all of that sort of clutter is, and brought it inboard, so if you just want to walk past, you can do that, and then there is a separate identifiable space that you kind of walk into, and I think that's how we've tried to consider that.
And how many public seating places are there in that square?
I don't know the actual number, but those, all of these, the inside of those planters, so if you look at the top right image where the people are standing sort of in the distance, that's all seated planting, yeah, just sort of there where that cursor is. That's all seating there. And each of the planters have little seats inboard.
Thank you. And then the final question I just want to ask was on the elliptical windows. And I know it's something which has been consulted on and residents expressed a preference for over alternative designs, although obviously they are limited to the designs in front of them. But I mean, they are quite unusual. I was just curious if you considered sort of if you presented arches as an option to residents as opposed to, you know, as another alternative to just the basic rectangles. And would also be curious to get your views on the, you know, because I haven't seen ellipticals really around London, what you think that will look like in 50, 100 years' time. Will it stand the test of time?
The short answer, I can't tell you how many different options we have shown of the tower glazing in particular. So yes, we consulted extensively and showed lots of different options. Arches were definitely one of them, rectangles, and all sorts of other things. I think we feel that these are going to be really beautiful and a bit different, and perhaps because it's a bit different and it's not rectangular, that will polarize a bit more. I think, you know, everyone else, when we showed rectangular, everyone said, oh God, that's just so boring, it could be anywhere in London. And this is a bit different, and it will therefore mean that some people will love it and maybe some people will hate it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes maybe that shows interesting design. So we believe that through a lot of consultation, the general vibe and direction of travel, including our own belief, is that we have a geometrical shape is something that 1950s buildings did a lot. Think of Richard Seaford all over London, all of those kind of things. We've certainly seen elliptical shapes. Depends what you call elliptical, but the building next to the Guildhall, I know it's not Notting Hill Gate, but that 50s building there has these sort of slightly lozenge-shaped windows. It's quite typical. So we think but we didn't do it at every floor and do that thing where every single floor has one because we thought that was too much. These are quite soft. They only happen 8 times on the building, 6 times on the building, I think, or something like that, at these individual things. And they do provide that extra little kind of character and differentiator and something contemporary and exciting, which a lot of people got excited by in our presentations, that it wasn't just going to be another relatively faceless 1950s office building, that actually this was something a bit different, while still doing something that they did, but in a contemporary and slightly different way. So, you know, we really do believe in it. And also, it was nice to have that, because we actually thought everyone would go for rectangle, but it was nice to actually have everyone go, no, this is exciting. This is kind of the sort of things that, I'm not saying that they all wanted that, but they were more encouraged by something that wasn't just like the other buildings that we've done along Notting Hill Gate, which perhaps were more kind of slavishly following 1950s. This is a bit different and it is contemporary, but it also has that. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And I do have, sorry, I just remembered one more question. Yeah, sorry, final question. Just responding to something raised by residents in terms of light pollution. And I know the lights will be on automatic. I appreciate that, which is good. But people work late at night, cleaners come in at night. You can imagine a situation where from Hillgate Village you're seeing lights come on and off throughout the night. And residents raise the idea of automatic blinds to at least mitigate that somewhat. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the things with those things is that, do they work, do they get installed? We believe that what we've done, because we are acutely aware of this, and we've been discussing for 18 months all of these things, by setting these floors back considerably, and we're talking, the first part of the building is 20 metres from Jameson Street. So think of, you know, as you go further into Hillgate Village, you're a long way away. We have landscaped planters along every single terrace edge, which are, you know, the height of a handrail and then landscaping on top. So we believe that we've got quite a high, you know, talking about the high parapets that we might have had for plants, we've actually got that along every single terrace with these planters and then the planting that will go in those. So we really, yes, from right the other end of, is it Hillgate Street, right the other end you will see the potential for some office lights, that thing. But generally walking around there, we believe we've done everything we can to mitigate even seeing the windows with these setback deep terraces with planters on the edge and planting in those terraces. So we believe we've done that without the need for automatic blinds that generally, I don't know, they just don't seem to work.
Toby, did you have a final question?
I do, thank you. Actually, I'd like to ask something of Ms. Fleming-Brown first, and then a possible follow-up with the applicants. And I'm also sort of acknowledging that there hasn't been a huge amount of time to digest this kind of massive report. But I do want to ask about landscaping, and as you understand what they're proposing for that corner, and you know, they seem quite convinced that they're mitigating as much as they can. It's not going to be what it would have been if it was an internal one, but what do you see as the failings in what they're proposing, and given your sort of experience with this sort of stuff, how do you think there's a sort of way of conditioning, you know, how we could actually go about maintaining it and setting it up that would be, you know, potentially satisfactory?
Well, I've been involved with the site for 30 years because I was one of the co-founders of the Notting Hill Gate Improvement Group, which planted most of the original trees, including the tree which is now called the Newcomb tree. It's a very, very difficult site to work with. It's quite a hostile site. And because of that, because there's a lot going on in the substructure, a lot of the planting that's being proposed isn't going to be planting in soil, it's planting in containers. Planting in containers is problematic because most plants and certainly most trees don't root as well. They're much more susceptible to disease if they're containered, and they need much more careful maintenance and much more careful watering. We would love to see a full landscape proposal that included watering, including sustainable rainwater collection from the building, and a watering, planting, and maintenance proposal. We'd certainly like to see a condition requiring anything which fails to thrive or which dies must be replaced. We think that it's important that as the urban greening factor hasn't been met, that in this development, despite its massive size, it's very important that what is provisioned is actually sustainable and workable. And we've seen an excellent example in 133 to 139 Westbourne Grove, where a condition was placed on a consent that a full landscape application came before planning committee. We found it concentrated the developer's mind wonderfully on net biodiversity gain, sustainability, water collection, all these good things. Because there's a lot of, to give them credit, there are some exciting proposals here. There are the proposals for vertical greening and green roofs. But we've seen a lot of these proposed and fail. And they fail through lack of specification, they fail for lack of maintenance. And particularly if you've got a development like this where the applicant will probably sell the commercial interest, even if they themselves remain around for some time to maintain it, or to, as the operator. It's really important that this is conditioned so it becomes a permanent plan for this area, because this is the only popular piece of planning gain for this entire development. It's the only thing that everybody agrees could be better. It's not a great canvas. Nobody would put a public square on this particular corner. It's got 6 lanes of traffic in one direction and 4 lanes in the other. It's polluted, it's windy. It's going to take a jolly long time for some of these new trees to grow to actually achieve the wind mitigation that is being discussed here. The original Notting Hill Gate trees were put in 30 years ago, and they're only just having a substantial effect now. You won't be able to put in very mature trees into containers because the root systems won't be strong enough. So it does need, we think that this needs a lot more thought, and the condition should be a full landscape application comes back to committee.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you for that. Maybe, Toby, if we ask the
Thank you, yes. And also, if I could just add, well, firstly, I'd just like to have your response to those and how you'd feel about conditions of that nature. And also just to sort of piggyback on that, as I understand it, it's not ideal, but there is a general feeling that as if I'm sort of reading the room correctly, that we want the GP surgery, we want certain things, and we don't want to spend another 10 years trying to figure it out. And one of the other major conditions that's been requested was for obscuring the type of glass with those the offending Hillgate facing windows. And I just want to know what you'd say about that if those were if those sorts of conditions were being discussed. But sorry, the most important one was to just respond to the
firstly, on the landscaping, we'd be delighted to work with you on this. It's really in our best interest to create something that lasts for a very, very long time. We've got to attract the best tenants. It's got to look as good as it possibly can through all weather and for a very long time. So we'd be delighted to do that. Henry?
Yeah, it is the main entrance of the building as well, so it's got to look good. But with the windows, I mean, maybe there is a compromise to be reached. I think perhaps one could look at some sort of obscuring, say, up to a certain height so you can't look down, but you can still walk out of the lift lobby and at least see the distance, but maybe you say it's obscured up to a height of 1.5 or something like that. We're talking about the windows on the west elevation. Yes, exactly. Yeah, we might be able to accept something like that. So that maybe is a compromise.
Thank you.
Good. Any final questions? Anyone? No. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you very much, everyone.
Sorry, I can just confirm that is just the 3 windows on the western elevation of the tower there that we're talking about. That's the windows.
I think so. Now you've got me nervous that I've made some mistake.
No, it's those, isn't it? Yeah, no, it's the ones that we've been referring to.
Yeah, I'm sure you're.
Yes.
I think we're all thinking about the same things. Very good. Well, in that case, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for speaking and answering our questions. I suggest we now maybe take a break for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll resume. Thank you. think we can restart if you can take your seats if you wish to carry on. Thank you. Good. Okay. Good. So, colleagues, it's our chance to ask officers questions. Who'd like to go first? Sonia. Sorry.
It's not working. Oh, there we go. Again. Thank you. So the site is not in a conservation area, but it's obviously adjoins the boundaries of 4 different conservation areas. And I'm a little bit concerned about the impact it will have on the conservation areas, not just in terms of the design of the building itself, but particularly the height. It's obviously considerably taller than the existing building, and to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, would create a new precedent in the area. I don't think there are any other buildings as tall as that around, sort of in the surrounding neighbourhood. So what, I suppose, how do you assess the impact of this proposal on the conservation area, and what importance does that have? Because I think it's very clear from the pictures that the views from Kensington Place and Hillgate Place, and most of the views actually, apart from maybe Church Street, the height does create a very different sort of dynamic, and it is very much a sort of the view is sort of an intrusion. It is very, very different to the sort of nice, quaint streets around there. So are you able to just explain a little bit why this isn't a more important issue in your analysis or assessment of the case?
Sure, thank you for the question. I'll probably start with your last comment first. It certainly is an important consideration in the assessment, and the report goes to some length in assessing each of the views where there would be an impact on the conservation area, or indeed where there wouldn't be one. So I think I'm going to answer your question more generally, unless you'd like to come back with a particular view that you're concerned about. But the building is about 12 metres taller in height. I'll focus on height because that seemed to be the main thrust of your question. It's 12 metres taller than existing. In terms of other buildings of height, the existing tower is a building of height, but there's also Camden Hill Towers further to the west, which marks the other end of Notting Hill Gate. So yes, these are isolated points of height that exist. The report, the heritage section of the report, does consider not only the design of the building, but its height, massing and bulk. And as I set out in my presentation, the views that I showed the committee earlier are those instances where, looking at height, massing, bulk and design as a whole, that is what the assessment has been made on, and the conclusion is that where there is a harmful impact, it is very minor or minor.
There was no situation in which the height could be maintained as it is with the existing building.
Well, the proposal is not to maintain the height of the building as existing.
So, okay, but that wasn't something that was, I suppose it was more a question for it wasn't something that was sort of discussed at all?
Not as part of the planning application, because we've got to assess the proposal as it's presented to us. We haven't redesigned the scheme for the applicant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. First one, just going back to the height. Could you tell us what weight needs to be given to the previously consented proposal, which we obviously voted down at this committee, but was then overturned, and also the difference in the height and massing, a bit more detail around that. I believe it was 17 stories versus 13, but in terms of stories can vary in height, so in terms of metres. So yeah, the difference between the two in height and massing, and what weight we need to give it from a planning point of view.
Sure. Can I draw your attention to paragraph 6.1 of the report, because that's where the 2020 permission is set out in terms of what was granted and also the weight given to it. I'll read from the report that limited weight is given to the 2020 permission in the assessment of this application because it is a significantly different scheme, which, as you've heard the applicant say, was not financially deliverable, and that permission has expired. And therefore my advice to the committee would be not to turn this into a contest between the 2020 permission and what you've currently got before you, because they are different schemes. But to answer your question about comparison, the consented scheme was significantly taller. It was 72 metres in height. But as I say, I really want to reiterate that this assessment that's been carried out in the report is not hitting that 2020 permission against the current application.
Thank you, Chairman. Next question is around the rear views of the buildings on Kensington Church Street. And you'll have heard our discussion around the impact and the colour of those, and particularly around the plant. And I did hear what the applicant said, but I just feel there surely must be more that can be done on the plant. Are there additional conditions you explored? What are the ways that we can mitigate the impact? And also, what are the ways, in terms of the general sort of colour, post, if planning permission were granted, post that fact, discussions could be had to make that as acceptable as possible?
Sure. Might it be helpful if we bring that image up on screen? So from the discussion I heard, there was concerns about the rooftop plant. That is a concern reflected in the officer's report. We do understand as officers that plant has to go somewhere. The plant's going on the roof. I think the way it's been designed has tried to be very careful in setting it back from both the front on Kensington Church Street and the rear, but nevertheless it is going to be seen in some views. I think the way that that visual impact can be minimised is through the choice of colour, to make sure that it reads very recessively against the sky. I mean, there are not many days, are there, where you see a bright blue sky like this, so actually grey is probably quite a sensible choice. But condition 5 would control materials and would give an opportunity for particularly the plant enclosure to be looked at in more detail to make sure that it isn't going to stick out on the roofscape any more than it has to. And then turning to your next point about the brick, I've seen that the Kensington Church Street block has been described in the design and access statement as a warm oat coloured brick. Now, these images may not do that description much justice, and it might look actually a little bit darker than it would in reality. And it is for that reason that we have recommended condition 5, which includes material samples such as the brick, and what that involves, should this application be granted with that condition on it, is that a visit will be arranged where officers will go and look at that sample on site in its context. That panel will be, we will ask for that panel to be completely dry, so there's no trickery in the colour. We will look at it from all angles, we will touch it to know its texture, we will wet it to see what it looks like when it's wet, so that we can have the best, make the best assessment of what is an appropriate colour for the brickwork.
Colleagues, other questions? Who would like to? Sam?
Thank you. Just following on from that point, should this move ahead and those conditions be used, I think it would be helpful that that residents, and I think it was being welcomed on all sides, that residents would also be seeing the samples and materials and having a good opportunity. Since they've already had good opportunity to feedback on designs, it would be useful if when there are those major materials questions that they could reflect on that as well.
I think that's a very sensible suggestion. The condition, as worded in condition 5, does ask for the sample panel to be provided on site, and I feel confident that there's a way of making sure that sample panel can be erected in a place which is publicly accessible.
Thank you. I mean, as probably became quite clear, I mean, I'm quite keen that we can put some pretty sort of strong conditions just in terms of being able to be confident about the ongoing maintenance of that corner, landscaping, and that comes with a certain amount of consultation, you know, with presumably through you know, the relevant RAs and so forth. And also, since we sort of does look like the applicants are kind of willing to look at mitigating some of that west-facing glass, like using obscuring materials for perhaps some of it. So, I mean, those two points particularly, I'd be very keen to condition. And so I'm really wondering how strongly we can do that, because my concern is always just like, oh, you know, there's no real mechanism for enforcing it and all of that.
I mean, really good points. It's very clear from the discussion we've heard that that's important to a lot of people. I'll start with landscaping then. Can I draw your attention to condition 28 firstly, which is for a landscaping and public realm scheme requiring details to be submitted for the council's approval. There are a number of different criteria listed under that condition, asking for all components that make up a landscaping and public realm design. But the bit I want to draw your attention to really is the text towards the end of that condition, which states that the landscaping and tree planting shall have a maintenance and watering provision following planting, and then also if any trees or shrubs within a certain time period from the first planting die or are removed, then there is a mechanism by which replacements can be offered. So that would be, I would suggest, a suitable way of controlling the planting, including the maintenance and watering provision. And then, to a lesser extent, but still relevant, condition 39, which is about trees and landscaping, so specifically trees, and asking for those details to come forward, enabling officers to assess whether the species that have been chosen are suitable for the location, because there's absolutely no point planting things that have very little chance of success.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I mean, I suppose my instinct is to want to go a bit further, and that's just because I know that those mistakes happen with that all the time. Like, the wrong thing gets planted, and you know, actually that second condition, 39, is actually a little bit more relevant to me, I think, because you are, you know, making sure that things are properly decided on. Okay.
I mean, I think, thank you. I mean, it would be unusual for sort of landscaping, public realm condition to be brought back to a committee, but we'd be able to do that if we wished. I mean, I do think this is quite a prominent, although it's not a huge area, it is very prominent on Notting Hill Gate, and I think 28 and condition 39, I think, wasn't it? I think we could do that if we wished, couldn't we? Yeah?
I mean, procedurally, of course you can bring it back. However, I would just restate that these are quite familiar conditions to officers for large developments, and we are certainly no strangers to being able to assess suitable landscaping designs.
I wasn't suggesting otherwise. I was merely saying that because of the prominence, that I think the idea that members, and obviously because it came back to a committee, members of the public would be able to see what was going to be proposed, and there might be a discussion about that. I think that's reasonable. Just moving on to the point actually also Councillor Benton mentioned about the west facing windows. I think if I heard Mr. Squire correctly, I think he wasn't strongly against having obscure glazing up to a level that would have an element of preventing somebody sort of staring straight down on anybody. I think at the margin, you know, it might help. I don't see harm in it. Presumably that would have to be another condition. Am I thinking right there?
Yes, I'm just bringing up the image just to help us consider this point, because it seems that there are two issues, aren't there, with the glazing. There's concerns about the overlooking, and then also concerns about light spillage from this. So I just want to reiterate that although you can't see it very clearly in this image, behind that green netting there are some existing windows present, albeit they are smaller than what is being proposed. So I do understand why people would feel concerned about that. However, I do want to also reiterate the distances that we are considering here. 20 metres at its closest point, which is a generous separation distance, which will only get increasingly further away as you go through the Hillgate Village area. And so for that reason, obscure glazing was not considered necessary to make this development acceptable. It's not uncommon for there to be glazed areas in lobbies. Whether that means someone is going to actively stand there and stare out into the distance, I couldn't comment, but I'd say even if someone chose to do that, the separation distance is sufficient to avoid residents feeling overlooked. And with the light spillage, there is a condition that has been recommended for artificial lighting. I will just see if I can find it for you. Oh yes, condition 12. Artificial lighting, condition 12, which covers details of exterior artificial lighting and interior lighting to the western elevation of the Newcomb House Tower and rear of the Kensington Church Street block, which I hope would provide the committee with sufficient reassurance that those details can come forward in a way that would enable approval of specific details about how that works.
Yes, I note that, and I think, colleagues, I think in a way that actually is probably the more important one, because even from a distance, if something is almost always being lit up, then that has quite an impact on, because you can see it from afar. Any other questions to officers or clarifications? Tom.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to the security concerns, and we heard quite a difference of opinion on the impact of opening up Uxbridge Street to the square. And I suppose we'll only really know once it's built and in operation and people start using it. So is there any mechanism whereby we can put in a review after a year of use or something to see what the impact is, and at least then still place some onus on the developer to do something about it if it's more like the residents suggested than like the developers suggested?
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of discussion tonight about Uxbridge Street and the fear of crime and perceived fear of crime too. So my understanding is that there are existing issues of antisocial behaviour taking place in this location irrespective of this planning application. And this proposed development would improve the quality of the street, and it would enhance its permeability and legibility to Notting Hill Gate. It enables further natural surveillance to take place where there is none already. And actually, could we go back to the slide that demonstrates the existing situation? That may be helpful. Here we are. And so there is going to be an improvement in the street experience. There's going to be a clear sight line through to Notting Hill Gate. There's going to be a lack of hiding places, and there's going to be increased activity. That in itself will go some way to resolving the issue. I will also make the point here that the application was reviewed by the Met Police. They have a designing out crime team, and when they provided their comments on the application, there was no reference to physical barriers being necessary in this location. They were aware of the existing antisocial behaviour issues, and instead what they have recommended is the use of CCTV and a good lighting strategy to be a crime deterrent, and that is going to be incorporated into the proposals. And I would also like to make the comment that gates and barriers are a very outdated means of trying to solve antisocial behaviour, and I'm quite happy to take you through all tiers of policy and guidance, starting from the national level, cascading right down to the local level, which is very clear that gates and barriers are not the way to solve antisocial behaviour. And if that's helpful, I'm happy to give you the references to all of those.
I wasn't actually I wasn't actually suggesting gates of barriers. I was suggesting a review after a year to see what impact sort of opening up that street has had. I can certainly see why lighting and CCTV are sensible security measures to implement there. Yeah. But yeah, my question was, is there some impact, is some ability to put in a review, say, I picked a year randomly, but after a period of time, to see what the impact has been of the measures?
Well, there is a recommended condition 10, which covers safety and security. So that would provide an opportunity for details of crime prevention measures to come forward. I think I understand where you're going with your thinking about a review, but I'm just wondering how effective that would really be, because in order to have a review, you'd need to know what the existing position is to understand what the effect is in a period of time afterwards.
Well, perhaps instead of a review, like we have a condition which requires ongoing maintenance, can that extend to security? Or perhaps, I haven't read the details of the safety and security condition, but can there be an ongoing responsibility towards security in the same way there is for maintenance and planting?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at might be covered by condition 10, because once we do receive details of these crime prevention measures, you know, whatever they may be as appropriate, then those details that are eventually approved do have to be retained and maintained for the lifetime of the development. So it wouldn't be possible for something to be shown on paper and installed and taken away without a further review of the situation. So I hope that would provide enough reassurance on that point.
Very good, thank you. So colleagues, need to make a decision. Perhaps if we could put the planning balance slide, which I think is the penultimate slide, if I recall, up. Yeah, there we go. So that's those are the factors that I think we probably need to consider everything against. We've heard been a lot of debate this evening. I think in terms of land use, it may well be that planning policy and the development plan is a distinctly slow-moving river in relation to the actual need for office accommodation, even the very best quality, most accessible office accommodation. But there's no doubt about it, it's supported in policy. So it would have to be considered a benefit of the scheme. I think the new medical centre, the NHS official bodies seem to be content with that, and we've got new housing that meets acceptable standards. In terms of design, I think overall I actually agree with colleagues. It's a slightly mixed picture. I think aspects of the design are rather good. For example, the new building on Church Street, facing Church Street, I think is rather a fine building, certainly much better than what's there at the moment. And I think other aspects are reasonable. Other things we've heard about possible mitigations in relation to the colour of bricks and things like that. In heritage terms, I think yes, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that there are some limited harms in some views, because the remodelled Newcomb House obviously is a larger building. The existing Newcomb House, I think, would have to be considered rather an ugly building, but there's no doubt about it that there are certain views from conservation areas that do represent a degree of harm. I think that could only be considered a less than substantial harm, and in fact it would really have to be considered at the lower end of that kind of harm. In terms of living conditions, I think the people who are most affected really are residents who live in Jameson Street, and I think that there is an impact. You have a much larger building that is across to your east, and I think that's a factor. We have to take notice of that. It may be that some of the conditions can assist with mitigating some of that. In terms of transport and sustainability, we've not really heard anything very much. I would suggest to contradict what is in the officer's report, which is essentially to say it's acceptable in the round. So that would my very quick summary. I'm interested to know what colleagues sort of think about this going down. Councillor Mackover first.
Thank you. I wanted to, I've been thinking about this site for a long time and have seen the different applications over it, and I've also seen a lot of reports over the years to come to major planning. So I wanted to thank residents for their good comments and the applicant for their clear answers. Helps me resolve things, and also to thank officers very much, because each of the points that I thought maybe I would change a condition, or maybe I would ask for this or that or the other, I see that the conditions, in my view, are well written to achieve those aims and have all the things that I considered important are already in them. So I'm for the balancing issues and for everything else that's been said this evening, I'm in favour of this application, and I'm also in favour of not amending, and maybe colleagues can be different on this, but not amending the conditions for the reasons that have been discussed. I won't need to go through them all. I think it's a very strong report. It's a very well thought out application. It's never going to please everybody, but I do note that out of the 2,593 properties notified, fewer than 2% have objected. That's the 50 that's in here, and I think that there will always be people who can find things that they would want to do different, and there are always definitely going to be fears. But I think the conditions meet those and give significant control over the final details to make sure that there is minimising any harm. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. No, broadly agree. I think taken with, compared to what's there currently, I think this is a significant improvement. It's obviously a huge investment in the area. It's going to bring a much higher quality amenities, both through the medical centre and through shops and restaurants for local residents, and will also bring in more office visitors, workers who will spend money in the area. And so I think that there is significant public benefit in that, and as I say, significant improvement over what we currently have. I think I have to say I'm slightly, although broadly I think there are a lot of design benefits. Slightly uncertain about the elliptical windows. They are very prominent, but I do take the point that it's been heavily consulted on, and it's not for me to foist my particular design views on the local area and on the application. I do think, as I've raised, that the improvements can be made to the plant. I think the roofs of buildings are very important. They've always been a key part of design, and unfortunately with modern buildings we have all this extra plant you've got to do something with, but given the hill coming up into the conservation area in Hillgate, that plant is more prominent than it would be on most such buildings, and so I do hope work can be done to improve the appearance there. But I think broadly with the conditions discussed, I do think the investment in the area will be positive, and so I do think it's acceptable.
Thank you. Yeah, broadly inclined to agree. I'm also very aware. Look, I mean, my preference would always be for a residential-led scheme. Can't say otherwise. I do understand I have to take that up with policy. This isn't. So that is what it is. I also, you know, I do, as I said before, I really do get the impression that people want this to get done, and they want the GP surgery and, you know, the things that are being offered. And I think that in terms of the conditions we were discussing, I also agree with Councillor Mackover. Those are well answered by the officers. I appreciate that. So I would say the doubts that I'm still going to, the lingering kind of uncertainties I'm going to have around how that happens moving forward, I would sort of probably just say, you know, I'd love to see the ward councillors sort of really make sure that those lines of communication are open and facilitated, especially between, you know, the Pembridge and Kensington and all the RAs, all of that. I think that would be really, really important, because, you know, there's only so much we can say all kinds of things now. We can condition things. When the rubber meets the road, you know, it has to happen. You know, that's where my worry is. But I do think everyone's approached this in good faith, and that's how I feel about it now.
Yeah, so I think obviously there's a need to replace what's obviously a degraded building, and there's no architectural benefit at the moment, and there's an opportunity to revitalise the local area. And this proposal does offer some benefits for the community, nice, well-used retail space, obviously office space, and GP surgery. I still have the same concerns as I voiced earlier about the architecture and design, particularly the increased height and bulk, and I think that will have a fundamental impact on the 4 neighbouring conservation areas. And in some ways, I sort of think it is a bit of a missed opportunity to develop something that could be more aesthetically appropriate. So I'm balancing these two things in my mind, and I'm conscious that there isn't, I know that as just said by Councillor Benton, there isn't a community desire to get something done, and there isn't really an alternative at this stage. So, and I would support any of the conditions mentioned to improve the appearance, particularly around the plant and the square. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
That's helpful. So, colleagues, I'm getting the impression that we're actually quite happy for these landscaping conditions relating to Notting Hill Gate Square as proposed. We're happy for officers to deal with that, but we would offer them an informal steer by the fact that it was this public meeting, everyone's heard us say it, that we would expect officers to have regard to local residents, and that the applicant would take have regard to what people in the area and the various residents associations nearby thought. We're quite happy with that kind of approach. Generally, does that make sense? Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you. Well, in that case, thank you very much. I think we can probably move to making a decision. Now, the recommendation is actually, it's slightly amended recommendation, which is in the addendum report. Okay. Lorna, you yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify that very last point about the landscaping schemes in conditions 28 and 39, you're quite happy for the officers to determine those schemes, approve those schemes, but
yes.
have obviously taken into account the views of the local residents, ward councillors, etc.
Exactly.
Just want to clarify.
Exactly. And I think, just while you're there, strictly, the recommendation is actually in the addendum report, because clearly, substantial application, this is referable to the mayor. So we are in effect, we are saying that we're minded to approve, but obviously it has to go to the mayor. And obviously there's a Section 106 agreement, and the other clauses set out. It's paragraph 1.21 as amended in the addendum report. So that's what we are formally voting on. Yeah. Okay. So in that case, colleagues, can I see those in favour of the recommendation? Those against? No, that's unanimous. Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you everyone for attending this evening.